One of the topics we cover most extensively on this show, and that I've been writing about for several years now, is the way in which Donald Trump's 2016 campaign both captured, but then also facilitated, major changes in how many conservatives, and especially right-wing populists, think about foreign policy, militarism, war, and the U.S. security state. Those changes are not just my perceptions, but they're reflected in ample polling data, as well as the positions that populist right-wing leaders now regularly take. Those changes were a long time in the making. One can find their roots long before Trump in some of the key issues advocated by Pat Buchanan when he challenged George Bush 41 in the 1992 primary, and which Ron Paul championed when running for the GOP presidential nomination far more successfully than anybody anticipated in both 2008 when the nominee was John McCain, and then in 2012 when the Republicans nominated Mitt Romney. But it was really Trump's singular ability to attract attention and speak effectively to large numbers of ordinary Americans that not only reflected but really expanded the number of Americans who harbor serious distrust for the CIA, the FBI, Homeland Security, and the U.S. war-making machine, and in particular, to interrogate far more closely than ever before who the real beneficiaries are of endlessly posturing wars, pursuing wars far away from the U.S. that plainly have no effect on the lives of ordinary Americans except to drain their resources, risk their security, and prevent the United States from doing anything to facilitate an improvement in the material lives of them and their children. Finally, we're at the point now where questions are raised about who and what really are the objectives and who really values from this posture of endless war. Donald Trump himself dubbed this worldview and his foreign policy America First. And while that phrase clearly has a fixed and visible meaning, in sum, that the United States government should use its resources to improve the lives of its own citizens, not go around the world seeking conflicts and wars that enrich a tiny sliver of elites while immiserating everyone else, there are still some lingering ambiguities and questions about exactly what this doctrine holds, and more importantly, how it would apply to various conflict zones around the world, including in Ukraine, Iran, China, the Middle East, and beyond. Our guest tonight, Ambassador Richard Grenell, is one of the best positioned people to help explore these questions, though he worked in the Bush-Cheney administration, whose foreign policy Trump relentlessly denounced and attacked during the 2016 campaign, and since he became one of Trump's most trusted confidants. Trump first nominated him to be his ambassador to Germany, and he was confirmed by a 56-42 vote in the Senate, winning the votes of all Republican senators along with 5 Democrats. But then in early 2020, Trump nominated him to become his Director of National Intelligence, the senior executive branch official in charge of the nation's intelligence community. As you might imagine, Trump's nomination of Grenell came at the peak of Trump's battle with an intelligence community that was not only disloyal to him, but was actively working to sabotage him. Exactly as longtime Democratic Senator from New York, Chuck Schumer, warned Trump in early 2017 would happen if he continued to, in Schumer's words, quote, take on the intelligence community, something which Schumer said everyone in Washington knows not to do. The rage prompted by Trump's nomination of Grenell among the establishment wings of both parties is hard to overstate. CNN, as just one example, published an op-ed with this headline, quote, Richard Grenell is a disastrous choice to head U.S. intelligence agencies. That was from February 22nd of 2020. Now, to me, in Washington, there are few compliments higher than provoking opposition from the two parties' establishment wings to your foreign policy views. And while both Trump and Grenell decided that he would serve in this capacity only in an acting role until the permanent DNI was named, who would obtain Senate confirmation, it quickly became apparent why there was so much establishment fear to Grenell's occupying this position, beginning with his decision to declassify and thus allow the American people to see House transcripts on Russiagate that California Democrat Adam Schiff, among others, was desperately attempting to conceal. Now, as I indicated, the original impetus for this interview was Ambassador Grenell's objections to a statement I made over the weekend in reply to somebody asking me what his role was in the events leading to Julian Assange's arrest. So I certainly want to give him the opportunity to correct the record and give his version of events, but we'll also use this opportunity to speak with one of Trump's closest foreign policy advisors and confidants about a broad range of issues. Our interview with Ambassador Grenell starts right now. Ambassador Grenell, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. We're thrilled to have you on the show.
Glenn, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I know we had a little exchange. I wanted to correct the record. You were amazing with allowing me to state for the record what the facts were, so I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I mean, so people know at home, the first thing I did upon seeing your objections was I posted your objections, encouraged people to read them, and then we had a private conversation, and I suggested you come on the show just to clear that up. Let people hear your version. I've never heard it, so I'm interested in hearing it, but then also talk about a whole bunch of other things as well. So let's start with that. My understanding had always been, based on reporting, talking to people in all the camps, the U.S. camp, the Ecuadorian camp, the Assange camp, that the effort by the United States government to persuade the Ecuadorians to withdraw asylum was an effort that you were participating in and that you actually led. I've always said it was Mike Pompeo that was the primary impetus for the desire to imprison Assange, but that was my understanding of your role. You objected. You said you did talk to the Ecuadorians, but it wasn't what I described. So go ahead and tell me and everybody else what actually happened there.
Well, first of all, I have seen lots of people kind of assume my role and prescribe some sort of partnership with Mike Pompeo. Let's just say, for anyone who really knows the case, knows that I didn't always see eye to eye with Mike Pompeo. I'll say it that way, in a very nice way. Look, my role was pretty limited. I had been the ambassador to Germany, and a lot of media reports had been pushing this idea that I was Trump's guy in Europe, and they thought it was kind of a derogatory headline and narrative. They pushed it quite a bit, Trump's guy in Europe, Trump's guy in Europe. But it really backfired on them, because what it did is it made a lot of people in Europe who had not been able to have their voices be heard come to Berlin and try to get their voices heard. And so one day I was sitting in the office in Berlin at the ambassador's office, and a senior person, Foreign Service officer that worked at the embassy, she came in and she said, the Ecuadorian ambassador is downstairs and wants to see you. Now, this is really odd for a diplomatic moment where you don't just show up at an embassy, you try to get an appointment. But he was adamant. We couldn't see him then, but I set down the team to try to figure out what was going on. He wouldn't tell the team. He just said, I have to talk to the ambassador. It's an urgent matter. I wouldn't do this if it wasn't urgent, and I'd like to see him as soon as possible. So we scheduled a meeting for the next day. He came in, wanted to meet privately, and I always insisted on having one person with me. And so we had a very senior person at the embassy. We sat and listened, and the request was that the Ecuadorian government was tired of having Julian Assange at the embassy in London. It was getting very expensive. It was something that they couldn't keep up, and they were under all sorts of pressure to let him out. What the request is, could the United States government agree that if the Ecuadorian government released him, that the U.S. government, if and when they took possession of him, had an extradition treaty request or some sort of an agreement, would the United States government agree not to issue the death penalty or seek the death penalty? I was not involved in the case at all, but I like to be a diplomat and respond to the ambassadors who are in Germany. This was the Ecuadorian ambassador to Germany. And I said, I'm happy to take this request to the Department of Justice, and we'll get back to you. I called the Department of Justice that day. I spoke to, I can't remember actually, Glenn, if it was, if he was the acting attorney general or if he was the deputy attorney general, but I spoke to Rod Rosenstein. Got him right away. I said, here's the deal. The ambassador showed up. They would like to have our commitment not to seek the death penalty. And immediately Rod Rosenstein said, Rick, we have done that deal before. This is something that is not that new for the United States, and we would absolutely agree to that. You can tell them, we agree. And I said, well, I think it's probably best for you guys to know that this is something that they want. Why don't you go to the Ecuadorian government yourself? And so he agreed at that point that they would take it, knowing that that was the request. I didn't do anything else. I didn't talk to Mike Pompeo about it. I didn't seek anyone's approval. I just tried to facilitate the request, and the request was pretty easy from the U.S. government standpoint.
It doesn't surprise me that the U.S., the Justice Department, would agree to that deal, because a condition to getting the extradited Assange, that is, from the U.K. or any country in Europe to the U.S. would be that the U.S. would have to agree not to seek the death penalty. That's always a condition for extradition from Europe. But you did, though, in that answer, allude to the fact that he was saying they were tired of Assange being there because it was expensive and presenting other difficulties, but also they were being pressured in order to kind of let him go, in order to finally get him out of there. News reports said that 3 governments were the ones putting this pressure on him: the U.S., the U.K., and Spain. Spain had become angry with Assange because he was kind of inciting or siding with a lot of the protesters for independence, Catalan independence. Do you know who it is that was applying pressure on the Ecuadorians to withdraw that asylum that had been in place since 2012?
I don't. I mean, I was the bilateral ambassador to Germany. We had Nord Stream 2 going on, which I had my hands full with NATO spending and a whole bunch of other issues. This was not something that was on my plate. However, I did see, Mike Pompeo and others talking about Assange. And so I wouldn't deny, I don't know, but I certainly wouldn't deny that the U.S. government was putting that pressure on.
Just last question on this, and we can move on. It's certainly always been my view, and it's still very much my view, that the person inside the Trump administration who by far was most responsible for the decision to indict Assange — people should remember the Obama Justice Department decided not to do that, that they tried and wanted to. It only happened in 2019 — was Mike Pompeo. I don't even think he made any attempt to just conceal that. He very proudly, when he was the CIA director, stood up in 2017 and threatened and warned that he would personally put an end to WikiLeaks and their claim to free press and free speech. I don't know if you can confirm it, but at least part of what you're disputing is not that it was Mike Pompeo who was the leading impetus in the Trump administration for that to happen.
I really don't know. It wasn't on my plate. I have no idea who was leading that effort. Let me just say, separately, that as somebody who has a 20-plus year record of receiving classified information as a public policy official, it's really important to receive classified information. I know how useful it is. I know how we use it and what kind of information should be presented. There are rules, obviously, for classified information. And there are different rules for media and reporters. I am not somebody who believes that we should go after reporters who somehow get classified information. I think we should go after the people who leak. And those individuals who have sworn to not leak classified information because they've been given top secret security clearances, they should be punished. I am not somebody who wants to go to the receiver of that information, whether it's the media or NGOs or other people.
Or WikiLeaks.
Because look, I don't think that the person receiving the information is the one. We're all looking for transparency when you're not inside the government. But government officials, when you have your government hat on, you should be working really hard to make sure that we don't have anyone with a top secret security clearance with access to classified information that's lying or leaking. I think that's fundamental.
That's a good transition into what I wanted to ask you about, which is there's obviously a current controversy surrounding somebody who's a 21-year-old member of the Massachusetts National Guard who is accused of leaking top secret documents, classified documents. I personally haven't seen evidence that they're endangering specific people. They don't have names of covert agents or the like, but they are top secret documents. They involve some things like troop deployments in Ukraine and stuff, things you would expect the government to protect with classified designations. Nonetheless, I'm curious though, when you did become acting DNI, one of the first things you did that created a lot of controversy that I personally supported, a lot of people supported, was you declassified legally. You didn't leak, you declassified a lot of documents pertaining to things like the Russiagate investigation that Congressman Schiff and other Democrats were desperately trying to keep concealed. My view, having worked with classified information in the past and seeing a bunch of things marked top secret and classified that are really quite banal and not very informative, is that the U.S. government wildly overclassifies, that it labels almost everything these days, almost reflexively, top secret and classified. Is that something you agree is a problem in Washington?
Huge problem, which is one of the reasons why I was saying to you, I was an expert on receiving classified information, using classified information. I didn't collect it. I wasn't part of the collection process. But, when I was appointed acting DNI, it was unbelievable how many media people were screaming, this is a guy that is completely not qualified to be acting DNI. And my attitude was like, wait a minute, who better to be acting DNI than somebody who has a 20-year history with receiving classified information, knowing when it's good and when it's bad. And I can't tell you, Glenn, how many times I have been in a briefing with my briefer, telling me classified information or supposed classified information. And I would push back and I would say, I read that in the newspaper. That's open source. That's not classified. Why is this classified? So I think two things that are really important. One, it's absolutely true we overclassify information. We over-redact information, too, when we're giving information to the Hill. And that was one of the things that I saw with the footnotes of many of the documents. They would just redact this. And, I pushed back hard with DOJ and with the FBI, and the leadership told me, you're crazy, you can't do this, you're wrong. And I kept pushing, and I pushed through to say, well, I'd actually like to talk to the FBI agents whose name is on the redaction. I want to go to that individual, and I want to look them in the eye, and I want them to justify that this is a source or a method. Because to me, I've seen it unredacted, and it's not. It's not a source or a method. It's an embarrassing fact about the agency. And you don't want this out because of a PR exercise. This should not be redacted. And when I finally pushed through, past Chris Wray, past Bill Barr, and demanded that I meet with these individuals, and by the way, I met with these individuals. I'm going to break a little news here. One of the big moments when I was acting DNI is I got caught by the media carrying a satchel into the Department of Justice. What I was doing is I was going to a meeting where I demanded to meet with the FBI officials, and I was going to show them, they have a security clearance, I was going to show them the unredacted portions of information that had been redacted for years. And I showed them, I had the documents in that briefcase to say, this is not a source and it's not a method, it's a PR exercise. This is ridiculous. And if not for pushing through Wray and Barr, I would not have been able to unredact that information. Because when I looked at those FBI agents, they agreed with me. They said, you know what? I didn't do that. And my name is on that, but my boss did that. I don't think that's a source and I don't think that's a method. And I actually agree with you. So that was a big moment to push through, and it also empowered me and my team actually at DNI to say there's a lot more here that we need to challenge.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, sometimes when people ask me what's the most significant thing you learned in the Snowden reporting or working with WikiLeaks, it's actually that a lot of documents that I've seen in unredacted form that are labeled top secret are utterly uninformative or are clearly being hidden, not because they endanger people if they're disclosed, but to protect the officials in government who have done things deceitfully or otherwise corruptly. Let me ask you, there was some, go ahead.
That we're not, that nobody's putting an assumption here. I actually believe, though, any document that is labeled classified, top secret, any classification should not be leaked.
Right, you believe it should be done legally through the legal process of declassification.
Follow the process.
I understand. Yeah. You're not at all sanctioning leaks or anything of that kind. I definitely understand.
Or individuals assuming what is really, truly classified information. There's a process to declassify, and people should follow that. The President of the United States is the top guy who can declassify without a reason and can do anything that he or she wants. That is what the law says.
But if somebody inside the government finds evidence that senior government leaders are lying to the public or acting corruptly, and they try first to invoke legal whistleblowing procedures and don't get anywhere with them, and then they get to the point where they feel in good conscience as a citizen they can't sit silent and allow political leaders to deceive the public or to act corruptly. They have an obligation to show the truth to the public. Do you think there's never a time when that's justifiable?
Look, I think that the system that's in place has a lot of ability to go to people who can go public. I'm thinking of senators or congressmen who are trying to seek the truth. Maybe it's the opposition, right? So if it's a Republican administration, there are eager Democrats to show that something has been overly classified. So you could go to a Democratic senator. The same would be true in a Democratic administration. If you're not getting anywhere, if Avril Haines, for instance, or the CIA director are somehow not listening to you, and you feel very strongly that this is inaccurate information, it's a lie, it's spinning, it's deceiving the public, I think then you go to one of these oversight committees if you can't get through in the proper channel. There is a proper channel within the intel agencies.
But it is illegal work. It is a crime just as much for a member of Congress to leak or disclose classified information because they believe the public should see it as it is for anyone else inside the government, right?
It is, but there are instances where, let's say that senator is on the Intelligence Committee, where they can go and they can ask for a classified briefing and demand, that something be done. They can get a lot more, done with the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, for instance, than just a staffer that maybe can't get the boss of the boss of the boss to notice something.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.